I want to say something personal. So I live across the lake in Cleveland, Ohio. Given the politics in the country, I often look across the lake longingly. And I'm like perhaps the most senior citizen who's here. And if anyone wants to dispute that, come up afterwards and have a beer and we'll change ages. I'm not going to tell you how old I am. But I've been involved in the work of social activism for 50 years. I mean, I started when I was in college, and that's what I've done. I've had a couple jobs that look sort of legitimate. I worked in the United States Senate for a very progressive Democratic senator back in the 1970s. I worked with the United Nations, lived in India, working with an NGO on international development. But mostly I've been doing the kind of work we're talking about tonight. My mother's 90 years old. To this day, she still looks at me on occasion and says, what exactly do you do for a living? And it's a hard one to answer, but one of the things I've been coming to grips with in the last 3 years, if you had told me after 50 years of activism, where we would be in the United States is with Donald Trump, it is hard to imagine. And yet, I find this, even in the dark time we live in, I believe we live in a very dark time, and then you layer onto it climate change and growing wealth and on and on and on. And yet, I find this one of the most exciting times fraught with possibility of my lifetime. This is a time when ideas really matter, when people are feeling so distanced from the system, and I'm including the Trump voters, people who, in the United States, every public opinion poll is showing consistently that about 75% of the American public thinks, and this is the quote, the economic system is rigged against me in favor of the wealthy. Now, a number of those people decided to vote for a billionaire for president, so you got to figure that out. But there's this opportunity where people are really struggling with what is our democracy about? What is our economy about? And I'm very privileged. On one hand, some days I wake up and go, oh my God, I can't believe I'm getting on an airplane again. I'm on the road about 150 days a year. I just did a computation between now and the end of this year. I realized I'm going to be sleeping in my own bed 24 days or 24 nights. So I'm on the road all the time. So on one hand, it's kind of exhausting. It's hard to get enough time to do your wash when you get home. On the other hand, I'm really privileged at traveling to communities throughout the United States, some in Canada, a lot in the United Kingdom, other places in Europe, and the sort of foment of innovation, creation of bold, exciting new models, solutions completely outside the box that weren't there 10 years ago. It is extraordinary. Something is building. And I believe that the system in which we live, given the trends taking place, is ultimately going to be incapable of dealing with that. And what we are doing, what a place like this is doing, the things you described with capital and so forth, we are building up within this sort of dinosaur of a dying system. We could call it sort of hyper-capitalism that we live in, or a neoliberal system, or call it what you will. We are building up the structure of a new system. In the United States, there's however, as a colleague of mine says, the ticket in to play this game of this massive system change is decades of your life on the table. So this is not for the faint of heart. This is like all in, ongoing, for decades if needed, to win this great historic battle that we face. Tonight we're going to be talking not about nice projects, not about great alternatives, not about neat initiatives. We are literally going to talk about what does it take to bring about the transformation of this system, to literally move beyond what we've been told throughout our lives are the only two alternatives for how to organize a political economy. You either have to have centralized state socialism where the government's in control of everything, or you need to have this runaway capitalism which is designed to generate huge growth, huge economic activity, but keeps leaving most of us further and further behind. So tonight is about how do we build another system, literally another system. It's important who gets elected prime minister or president. Policy is very important, but we're not talking about that tonight. This is not about politics, and it's not about policy. It's about systemic change at the very heart of the economy, the political economy we live in. That is a difficult thing to get your head around. One of my favorite quotes is, given climate change, that it is now easier to envision the end of our planet than it is to envision the end of capitalism. Just think about that. That is really true. You can really see this whole planet going, and yet it's hard to see how do we move beyond what we've got here. Now, if we did a process like you did, and we all closed our eyes, and you don't need to close your eyes, and imagine we lived 3,000 years ago, and we're living in Pharaoh's Egypt. And that system's already been going over 500 years. And it's going to go on way more than 500 more years. And it would be rational to think, and most of us couldn't get beyond thinking, well, this is it. There will always be pharaohs and priests and sphinxes and pyramids, that's just the way it is. And yet today, you go to London, you study it in the British Museum. Or if we lived in the Middle Ages, if we lived in 15th, 14th century York in the United Kingdom, in England, we would think that the church was always going to be in charge, that there's going to be the nobility, that there are going to be walled cities, and the peasants and serfs are going to live outside of it. And now we study in the history books. The truth is that human history is about the changes of systems constantly. It's a very common phenomenon, but when you're in it, it's very difficult to see your way through to another possibility. So tonight is really about what does that possibility start to look like? What do we mean by fundamental systemic change?